Well, hey there, everyone. My name's Brady. Welcome to Mission, and thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. Before our service gets started, we'd like to take a few minutes and tell you about some things coming up for you and your family around here. So, check this out. Ladies, we're excited to have you join this Wednesday evening for the Know Your Story event. This workshop-style event is designed to make you ready to share a short version of your faith story in 5 minutes or less. This is going to be an amazing evening that you won't forget, so register online at missionaz.org. Each summer, we work with a few of our local impact partners to help prepare vulnerable kids and families for the upcoming school year through our annual backpack drive. During Sunday services for the month of June, you're invited to pick up and return backpacks filled with school supplies for these kids. After service today, stop by the tent in the courtyard to get started. As you know, there is a growing need for welcoming refugees into our community. Because of that, we are partnering with Phoenix Refugee Connections to host our first ever refugee care workshop on June 25th. In this workshop, we'll examine the global refugee crisis from a biblical perspective, learn how the U.S.'s refugee resettlement program works, learn about the challenges our refugee neighbors face, and how the church can come alongside them locally in practical, empowering ways. Find out more info and register at missionaz.org. And thank you again for being with us today online and on campus. Our service starts right now.
Well, good morning, Mission, and welcome. We are so glad to have you here today. Listen, if you're joining us online and you're watching for the first time, drop a comment in the chat and let us know so we can connect with you there. If you're here for the first time in person, we are so glad that you decided to join us today. And let me tell you, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. We believe that God has something special for you here today. If this is your first time, we would love to get the opportunity to meet you also. So after the service is over, head out those double doors to an area called the Hub. We've got guest services there that would love to get to know you, answer any questions that you have. We've got a gift for you. And we would like to also invite you to First Step. This is a 20-minute orientation of Mission where you can learn more about Mission and how to connect there. We would love to meet you. So thank you for being here. Listen, we have an awesome service planned for you here today. We are going to worship together. We've got Jared Hurd back with us today. Woohoo! He's going to continue in our message, One Shot. But before we do anything else, I would love for you guys to stand up, greet one another, and share how you plan to keep cool today.
Oh, awaken my soul. His praise aloud. We sing His praise. You deserve it, God. Yes, you do. There is a sound that changes things, the sound of His people on their knees. Awake up, you slumbering, it's time to worship Him. Awake, my soul, and sing His praise. Sing His praise Awake, my soul, and sing His praise. Sing His praise aloud. And when He moves, and when we pray, we're stood alone, now stands away, where every promise is amen. And when He moves, make no mistake, the bows of hell begin to shake. All hail the Lord, all hail the King. We praise You, God. Hey, let the King of Glory enter in. Fall down on your knees and worship Him. Let His praise rise up. Don't hold it in. Don't hold it in. Come on, we sing, awake my soul. Awake my soul and sing His praise aloud. Sing His praise aloud. Oh, awake my soul and sing His praise aloud. Sing His praise aloud. Mission. We're going to sing a new song this morning, and I love this song because it says, no matter where you are in your life, no matter what you've done or your circumstance, you can always come home. You are never too far gone. The God of everything loves you with everything. You know I lost my way. I'm sure I will again someday. There's a whisper calling again. Here it is.
Yes, let's go. Give somebody a high five next to you and he can have a seat. Well, I love that. If you are a prodigal today, maybe you've been away from church for a long time and you found yourself back here today, I just want to say welcome home to you. We love that you're here. Give us a chance to get to know you. Again, that hub, you can go and find that team that would just love to welcome you to Mission. Well, I'll tell you what, a couple weeks ago, man, this church, the theme of this church for this year has just been generosity, like season of impact back in November. You guys crushed that goal. Our general budget, 100% to plan. You guys are right on par. A couple weeks ago, I said, hey, I don't want to leave any kids behind from summer camp, from attending summer camp. And just the outflow of love, the generosity that's come in. Over $22,000 you guys gave to make sure that every single kid goes to camp. I love that. It's such a milestone in those kids' life. Come on, I love it. I can't get over it. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not just carrying a backpack on purpose. This represents a lot of life for a child in our community. Concordian School, Title I schools in our community, low-income schools in our community. Here's our goal. Every single one of those kids gets a backpack this month before they go to school. I think there's an opportunity for us to be the community, to be the church where we work, live, and play right here in our backyard. I want to invite you to it. Last week I saw a long, long line, but we still got a ways to go. So for all of you who didn't grab a backpack, or maybe you grabbed 2 and maybe you can grab another 5, I want to encourage you when you leave this place to go right outside that courtyard, go grab one of these backpacks, fill it up, and throughout the month of June, it doesn't matter, just bring it back here on a Sunday this month. We want to get these in the hands of those kids so when they start school, they show up. I think the young kids say with a little bit of drip, you know what I'm saying? Like, they're all right there. I love that. So let's do that. Church, can we do that? Okay, get out there, grab your backpacks. I'll tell you what, we're gonna love this community really, really well. And then we're gonna celebrate what God does through his people. I love building this house with all of you. God is in this place. It's been a fun, fun season. Welcome to summer. I'm glad we got AC in here. But hey, if you came today prepared to give, I want to encourage you to do that. You can give online. You can give at one of those kiosks. We're gonna give you just a minute to do that. Let's keep it going, church.
What's up, Mission? Good to see you. Hey, if you're new here, my name's Jared. I'm a pastor in San Diego, and I don't know why I'm here in Phoenix today. True story, this past week, I kept getting emails, because I've been here a while. I don't have an office here, but I've been here a while. And I keep getting emails, and this happens periodically from some of you. Hey, we're going to be in San Diego. We'd love to visit your church. We're going to be in San Diego. And I noticed there was an uptick in those emails this past week of, what do you call yourselves, Phoenicians? I don't know. What is the title? Saying, hey, we're going to be in San Diego. And I kept thinking, like, oh, that's funny. All these people from Phoenix coming out to San Diego this weekend. Thank you. Do you think I don't own a thermometer or have skin? Yes, I'm quite aware, as is everyone else in the room. In fact, most people here didn't even know this was a church. They were just looking for shelter, ma'am. Thank you. My goodness. What's your name? Sandy. Wow. Everybody needs a little of that in their life. Just someone following them around, screaming facts at them. The speed limit is 65. Sandy. Great to meet you. My name's Jared. I don't have my family here with me today, and I'm just by myself, so it feels good to have, my kids typically do that to me. They just sort of scream random things at me. So thank you, Sandy. I'll tell them. Anyway, good to be here. I'm excited to dive into I promised Kevin I was going to stay on the rails, and I'm already off the rails. So I'm just going to dive in. And the series, I love this for the summer, is just this idea of one shot, a big idea. And today I want to talk about this big idea that is the idea of the scriptures, which is a new creation that is being launched in Jesus. Are you with me? And this isn't just some big, ethereal, massive 40,000-foot idea. What I want to land on today is how you are a new creation, how Christ calls you forward, and how something about the resurrection of Christ gives way to your resurrection in your life. And some of us today, you need a resurrection. You need a second coming, a second act in your life, and that's the power of God, and that's why we have church. That's what church is all about. I don't know how you possibly can explain that Jesus defeated death. I don't know how you put words on that. At a certain level, it's unexplainable. We read the story, we know the story, we tell our kids the story that Christ defeated death by the power of God. It is the central Easter announcement, and at a certain level, it's unexplainable. You cannot possibly explain. How did Christ reverse the second law of thermodynamics? How were the amino acids in his body rekindled? How do you explain that? You don't. And I think if you were to go to lunch with one of the writers of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, they wouldn't try to explain it to you. They probably would flip the question and say, it's not about how do you explain the unexplainable, but how do you deny the undeniable? The resurrection of Jesus for them, it wasn't something they were trying to explain. It was something they just said, look, we cannot deny this. None of them were going to get rich off of this, by the way. All 12 of these guys were going to lose their lives over what they claimed to see. They were fugitives from the Roman Empire, proclaiming that Christ, their guy, was more powerful than Caesar and had defeated death. It was undeniable for them. And I can't think of a cultural equivalent for you. I can't think of anything in our society where there's any parallel. The only thing I could possibly come up with is Bitcoin. I cannot explain Bitcoin to you. I know some of you can. In fact, some of you are going to send me lengthy emails later. But I also cannot deny its reality. Is this a Bitcoin crowd? I don't know. I'm feeling my way through this thing. Bitcoin, anybody have Bitcoin here? Sandy, can you explain to everybody what Bitcoin is really quickly? No clue. It was about a month ago, I was at a dinner party, and finding a groove at a dinner party is a little harder than it used to be. Are you with me? And I pop into one circle, and and I think the conversation turned toward politics. I was like, I'm out, I'm good. Popped into the next circle, and they were talking about current events. Can't remember what it was, Johnny Depp or Will Smith, whatever was going on at the time. And I was like, I'm out. And I firmly planted myself in the cryptocurrency circle. And I thought I could learn something here for a few moments. And I popped into the circle, and they were talking about NFTs. Anybody heard that phrase, NFT? No, what NFT is, stands for non-fungible token. Now, some of you are going to say, what's a non-fungible token? It's not fungible. It's a digital currency. I'll take a crack at it. It's essentially something that cannot be duplicated. It's on the blockchain. Anybody heard the word blockchain? It's like, what is that? Is that a prison? What is a blockchain? But I popped into this circle, and everybody's talking about NFTs and cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and I quickly realized I am out of my element in this conversation. I have nothing to contribute. And they're going around the circle. One guy, they keep using that phrase NFT. I thought they were talking about NAFTA for the first 5 minutes of the conversation. And finally, one of the guys looks at me and says, Jared, what are you? And everybody's convinced this is the future. Everybody, this is going to change the world. One guy was actually in the blockchain business, and they're going around the circle, and I'm standing there, and I got my cheese plate, just listening. And somebody says, Jared, what do you think about NFTs, non-fungible tokens? And I'm going, I don't think they're fungible. I don't know. I have nothing to add to this current conversation. And I think that's probably at a certain level how the writers of the Gospels felt. How do you explain something that's unexplainable yet at the same time is undeniable? You can't. It's how do you put words on it? And the reality of the New Testament is that a non-fungible God showed up into this world and defeated death. And there's no way to just put words on it. It's something you have to experience for yourself. And I think that's what Mark is getting at as he records and writes this. If you have a Bible, I want to encourage you to open it to Mark chapter 16 together today. And this is the central announcement of the Gospels. If you take this passage out, you really just have a pamphlet of a Bible. It's the crux of the whole thing, that Jesus Christ defeated death. Mark 16 chapters long, and the whole story is about this guy who's come into the world, Jesus, and how he's gathered his tribe, and they're walking towards his death, towards crucifixion, and ultimately towards how Mark ends the story, Mark chapter 16, starting in verse 1. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. I hear pages turning. That just is like music to my ears as a preacher. And if you don't have a Bible, it's okay. You follow along on this screen. It says this: when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. And so they had seen their guy crucified on the side of a Roman highway. They watched it with their very own eyes. They knew he was dead. They knew that a day had passed, 2 days had passed, 3 days. We're going to go to the tomb, and we're going to physically be present with our guy. We want to be there where the body is, even though we know he's dead. It says very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on the way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? Which I think is a bit ambitious for these three women, don't you? I like their hustle. Which one of us is going to go and move the rock from its place? And it says, but when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And so something's happening, and they're trying to put their minds around it. How does this compute? It says, as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed, which I think you would be too. And they're curious, what in the world is going on here? And I love this story. This is the bedrock story of our faith. This is the foundation of everything we believe, that these three women come to a tomb on a Sunday morning, and they don't see a body in the tomb, that Jesus has actually defeated death, that he has risen from the dead. This is that some kind of a new creation has been launched into the world through the resurrection of Jesus. And what's amazing to me about the Gospel of Mark, as you read the story, really all the Gospels, Jesus is gathering his 12, and he keeps telling the 12, here's the plan, guys. In fact, you read Mark 8, he says this, look, I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be crucified, and after 3 days, I'm going to rise again. And then in Mark chapter 9, he says, guys, here's the plan. I'm going to Jerusalem, and after 3 days, I'm going to be risen from the dead. They're going to kill me for what I've done, for what I've said, and I'm going to defeat death. Mark 10, he says it again. Hey, here's the plan. Just want you guys to know. I'm going to go get crucified on a cross, and then I'm going to defeat death, and after 3 days. Now, if you've seen this guy turn water into wine, if you've seen this guy raise Lazarus from the dead, if you've seen this guy heal the sick, if you've seen this guy restore sight to the blind over and over and over again, and you've watched this, I mean, and then he told you, hey, here's the plan. I'm going to be crucified, and after 3 days, I'm going to rise from the dead. Wouldn't you be slightly curious if he pulled it off? And when you read the story, have you noticed none of these guys are there? None of the 12. I mean, wouldn't you at least be hiding in the bushes with some binoculars? Like, I just wonder. None of them are there. Three women, ladies, there you go. Sandy. Three women show up. Now, this is strange. It's strange at an intellectual level because if you were going to make up a story about your guy defeating death, this is not how you would tell the story. Women's testimony in a first century court was not admissible. Women were thought so lowly of in Roman courts, they would not allow them to testify. It would be thrown out. Women and children were so dismissed. You would only tell the story this way if it's what you actually saw and what actually happened, that it was 3 women who were there. This is what happens when it's undeniable. We can't deny this is the reality of the story. It was 3 women who came to the tomb, and they were the first ones to report the message of resurrection has actually happened in the world. And this was not a story anybody was expecting. Especially in the world of Jesus, you had really 2 groups of people. You had the Jewish people. They were the last group that would have expected God to show up in a body. God, even in this world today, for a Jewish person, God is so holy, he's so other. You can't even write the name of God. They write it G-D because he's so sacred, he's so other. They would never want to or expect a God to show up in a physical, dirty body. Certainly for the Gentile world, the Greco-Roman world of that time, this was not something they would have wanted or expected. The body was dirty, the spirit was good, and they would never expect a God or the gods to occupy a physical body. This was not a story that the only way you would write this down this way is because this is what actually happened, and you could not deny that this guy had defeated death. Now, you probably know this. There were a lot of stories that circulated in the first century about messiahs that had come and gone. And there were a lot of stories that circulated about messiahs that had defeated death, military heroes. And these stories would fizzle out within oftentimes hours or weeks or months. They would not survive because if you started to claim that somebody defeated death, you could go to the tomb and say, he's in the tomb. But for some reason, the least plausible story of the least plausible guy and the story that nobody was expecting and nobody really even wanted was the story that not only survived, but thrived throughout the first century and has changed the world forever, that Jesus Christ defeated death. How is that possible? Because it's a true story. It's a story that they could not deny, and they knew what it meant to proclaim this in the world, that new creation had come through Christ, that something cosmic had taken place. There was a shift in the world. And to proclaim this, we often look back on it and we go, well, these were ancient people. You know, they didn't know any better. You know, we have iPhones and Google now. We know better. You know, they probably, who knows what they saw. C.S. Lewis says, as 20th century people, 21st century people, we suffer from what he calls chronological snobbery. We look back on the ancient world and say, well, nothing, you know, they didn't know any better. We now know. To dismiss this story, if you're not a Christ follower, to just dismiss this story to say, you know what, they just didn't know any better. That is intellectual laziness. That is it's foolishness. You have to reconcile this story. How do you explain that this story survived and thrived and has changed human history? There's an intellectual piece to this, but there's another piece to it. And I think this is the power and the heartbeat of this story. If you keep going, in Mark chapter 16, it says, "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen, and he is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples," and then he says something very odd. This is Mark's version. "Go tell his disciples," what does it say? "And Peter." We'll come back to that. "He is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." Galilee is where they're from, 60 miles or so to the north. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. What a bizarre story. And yet this is the story that gathers from every nation, every tribe, every tongue, all over the world. How is that possible? There's that shocking little phrase in there, "Go tell the disciples and Peter." Is that odd to you? Who was Peter? If you read the story, if you read Mark, he's not just a disciple, he's like the main disciple. I mean, he's the guy who walks on water. He's the guy that is always there with Jesus. Jesus takes him into the Garden of Gethsemane. That'd be like me saying to you, I don't know, who's the quarterback of the Cardinals? Is it still Kyler Murray? Okay, it'd be like me saying to you, I'm going to go watch the Cardinals play and Kyler Murray. Like, well, of course, Kyler Murray, like, he's on the team. Why would you need to add that? It's an odd phrase. It's very strange that in the central story that has changed history, there's this little phrase, and Peter. What in the world is that about? If you rewind the story a couple of pages, what happens to Peter? He's the greatest of the disciples. He's the guy that walks on water. But he's the greatest failure, isn't he? He's the guy that in Jesus' darkest moment, when Jesus needed him the most, what does Peter do? He fails. He denies Jesus 3 times. He says, I don't even know the guy. They came to him and said, are you with this Nazarite sage? No, I don't know him. In the worst moment of Jesus' life, Peter is at his absolute worst. He lets his friend down. At this point in Peter's story, he should be erased from the history books. Certainly nobody should name their child after this guy. There should be no babies named Peter after this. No offense if your name's Peter, by the way. He's the greatest failure in human history. This should be over. This should be lights out. It should be done. And yet somehow the first thing Jesus does when he gets up from the dead, and the first thing that Mark wants you to know, and Peter, the greatest failure. Where's Peter at this point? He is probably hiding, hanging his head low, wondering if his life is even worth living because of the size of his failure in the most critical moment he let Jesus down. Well, what is this about? In Mark's version of the story, essentially, here's what's going on. There were basically 2 deaths that took place. There was the death of Jesus and there was the death of Peter. It was the end of Peter. And Mark is telling you there's about to be 2 resurrections. There's going to be not just the resurrection of Christ, but there's going to be the resurrection of Peter. I want you to go tell Peter, I'm not finished with him. I'm not done with him. His best days are in front of him. They're not behind him. This is how the grace of God works. And Peter. Here's why this matters for you, okay? The resurrection will become powerful for you. It will become undeniable for you in your life, not when you've checked a box and said, I believe it, but when you have experienced a resurrection of your own in your own life. And the power of this story is not just that Jesus got up from the dead. It's you in your life when you are at your worst possible moment, when the failure is hanging over your life, when you have done everything possible from self-inflicted wounds to lead to the end of you. There is Jesus standing over you saying, and Jared and Peter, get up. I'm not done with you. And the resurrection is not just about Christ getting up from the dead. It's about you and I in our worst possible moments, in the moments where the lights have gone out in our story, when we're at the end of our rope, we hear the voice of Jesus in our life say, and Jared, and Justin, and Tina, and Sandy, and Marco, and you hear that in your life, and all of a sudden, that's the power. That's when you haven't just believed it, but you've experienced it. Some of us in this room, there is a bankruptcy. It should have been the end of you. There was a divorce. It should have been the end of you. There was a health issue. It should have been the end of you. There was that relationship. It should have been the end of you. There was that job loss. It should have been the end of you. And you could look back in your life. It could have been when you were 16 years old. It could have been when you were 60 years old. But it was a moment where the lights were out. Everybody counted you out. Self-inflicted wounds. Your story was over. But Christ was not done with you. And you heard the voice of Jesus call out to you in your worst possible moment, say, and Jared, get up. I'm not done. And when you heard that, it puts you on a different trajectory and a different path. And that's what happens to Peter. That's my story. I hope that's your story in life. That's when the resurrection is powerful to you and you don't just believe it, but you've experienced it. I was 18 years old. I stumbled into the back of the church. I'm not quite sure how I got there. I'm not even sure why I was there, but it was a moment in my life at 18 years old where it was over. It was done. I was the last person you would expect to turn out to be a professional Christian, for crying out loud. And in that moment, in that place, and Jared, in your story somewhere, where's the and Peter moment? That's the place where resurrection, new creation, becomes real to you. Some of you, you could tell that story. Some of you, you need to tell that story. Where you were at your worst possible place, you're in your worst possible place. And Jesus is saying, go back to Galilee, because what's going to happen in Galilee? Is there going to be a public shaming? No, there's going to be a public forgiveness. And Jesus is going to meet Peter just like he meets you, and he's going to say to Peter, look, here's the deal. Peter, we both had the worst night of our lives. Mine was a death, yours was a denial, but I got up so you could get up. Get up, Peter. I'm not done. You're not done. You're not finished. What have you put in the grave and counted out? And Jesus is looking at you going, and Peter. Some of you today, it's a marriage you have buried, and you've already decided it's over. And Peter. Some of you, it's the hope you had in your son or daughter becoming who you've prayed that they become. And you're going, I don't know if they can. And she's looking at you going, I don't know if I want. And Peter, pray and Peter over those circumstances of your life. Let me ask you a question today. Where do you go with your failures in life? The things that you don't know what to do with, the things that nobody in this room even knows about, the things that you go to the family reunion and they know because they're family, you're just hoping nobody brings it up when you show up because it's so painful. Where do you go with those failures? And I know it's cliche in our culture to say, failure is important, you got to fail your way forward. And that's all true, and I believe all that, but at the same time, nobody likes failure. We all hate it. What do you do with your failures in life? Relationships, business plans, whatever it is. I tell you what most people do, they blame. They point their finger. It's not my fault, it's my mom's fault. It's not my fault, it's my boss's fault. It's not my fault, it's the economy's fault. It's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. We blame, we get angry. It's everybody else in life. It is responsible for our failures. Where do you go with those failures in life? And if you just blame people for them, it will drive you deeper into despair and bitterness and victimhood and pain. And your story very well may be over, but if you allow your failures to drive you deeper into the waters of grace, and they press you deeper into the person of Jesus and the arms of Jesus, you will hear the tender shepherd say over your life, get up, I'm not done with you. And what you feel like is the end of you is just the beginning of a brand new chapter and a brand new story. New creation will be launched through your failures. It's not the end. Get up. You're not done. It's not done. It's not over. No, it's over. I wish you knew how over it was, Jared. No, it's not over when Jesus Christ is involved. You may be afflicted, but you're not done. You may be wounded and crushed and abandoned, but you are not done. The tender shepherd meets you in those moments. And when you are at your absolute worst, that's when you understand grace the most. And that's the beginning of the new thing, and Peter. Has it ever seemed odd to you, if you read it in the other Gospels, that when Jesus gets up from the dead, he still has nail piercings on him? Is that strange to you? I mean, think about it this way. He can defeat death. He somehow has the power to reverse the second law of thermodynamics. He somehow has the power to defeat death, and yet he gets up from the dead, and famously, Thomas puts his hands in the wounds, and somehow he gets up from the dead, and he still needs a Band-Aid. Is that odd? It should be. It's very strange. But he's giving you a picture of how you are to go through life as a Christ follower. It's a physical representation of how you go through the world now, marked by grace. The resurrection, it was not a time machine that erased the wounds. The resurrection, it didn't erase it, it repurposed the wounds of Christ. And through resurrection, they became greater. Christ became greater through his wounds. And now that's you going into the gathering, going to work. You became a Christ follower. It did not erase the divorce. It did not erase the bankruptcy. It doesn't erase your failures. It did not erase your wounds, but it does repurpose them. And now, just like Christ having defeated death, he got up and he was greater. You got up from what should have been the end of you, and it was not, and you're greater because of it. You know what the quickest thing to change about yourself is when you step into the presence of Jesus? It's your past. It gets revised. It gets repurposed. And now that thing that should have buried you is the thing that makes you, and it was the thing that created, it is the thing that birthed the new you into the world. And it was now the wounds that are there that you tried to cover up, the scars of self-inflicted wounds and decisions that you tried to cover up, they've now been repurposed in Jesus, and you don't have to hide them anymore because they're what makes you who you are. Some of you could tell that story today. The thing that was embarrassing, it's not embarrassing. Because the grace of God washed over it, and you, just like Christ got up from the dead, wounded, that's you going through life, wounded, but somehow repurposed and reimagined for a whole new existence in Christ, a new creation. Because you heard Ann Peter somewhere along the way in your story. That's the power of this. You know, I think every single one of us in this room, I mean, some of you hear this, you go, that sounds nice, and I wish I could believe that, but, you know, I can't explain why terrible things have happened to me. I can't explain why terrible things have happened in this world. Every single one of us in this room, you stand back from the news, you stand back from the world, and you go, that all sounds nice, but what about Ukraine? What about Uvalde? If God's so good, why does this happen? Why in my own life? Why in my own story has this happened? And it's a fair question. And I think at a certain level, maybe you grew up in vacation Bible school and you remember the story from Genesis that God made a perfect world and it was exactly the way that he wanted it to be. And then sin comes in and somehow a serpent, a snake, and Adam, Eve, they wreck the whole thing. And now we're kind of down here in the world and it was supposed to be perfect and you missed out on that and I missed out on that. And now it's this, big plan B. Congratulations, you get to live in God's plan B. You get the JV world, man. That's the message that we often, maybe it's not taught, but it's caught somewhere along the way. It should have been perfect, but it's not. It's this. And I think we read Genesis and we forget the promise of Revelation, which is what the resurrection is pointing us to. He's the first one to be restored. And ultimately, we all experience restoration. Revelation says that ultimately Christ is on his throne and he proclaims over humanity, behold, I make all things new. He wipes every tear from every eye. And he proclaims over all of creation that everything is not perfect, but everything is restored. And Revelation promises us, and Easter promises us, that a restored world is better than a perfect world. A restored world is better than a perfect world. And so you hear that, you go, no, I kind of would have liked perfect. No, you don't. If the world was perfect, you would not understand bravery. You would not understand loyalty. You would not understand what it's like to have a friend stick with you and ride out the storm with you. A restored world is better than a perfect world. You wouldn't understand being loved when you did not deserve it. All the things that make up your favorite movies, all the angles of the story that make it beautiful. A restored world is better than a perfect world. And the same thing is true for you. A restored you is better than a perfect you. Are you angry today that your life has not turned out perfect? Are you angry that relationship did not go perfect? Are you angry your husband is not perfect? Are you angry your kids aren't perfect? Be careful, they're sitting on the row with you right now. And that argument goes both ways, actually. Are you angry that your job isn't perfect? Are you angry that something did not go the way that you wanted it to go? What is it? You're like, perfection has been lost. The promise of Christianity is that a restored you is better than a perfect you, and perfect was never that good anyways. I don't have a tattoo, but if I'm getting one, that's what it says. Because you have the promise of restoration. You have the promise of Christ speaking over you and your life and Peter. Self-inflicted wounds, moments of life where it all went through your fingers like sand and that dream got shattered and crushed. That moment, it all felt like the ending. And Peter. New creation, new story, new reality, new promise. I'm going to ask you a question today as we close. Is there things in your life today you need to hear Jesus say over you and Peter and Justina and Marcus and Jared? Maybe another way to say it is there things in your life today, they belong to death? That grudge that you've been holding on to? That thing you can't forgive somebody over? That thing you can't forgive yourself over? It belongs to death. And new creation says death does not belong. Easter says death does not belong. Resurrection says death does not belong. Some of you have already experienced a taste of this in your life. You've already felt heaven meet earth in powerful ways on this side of heaven. You used to have that temper, and the older you've gotten, it's burned off a little bit and it's been turned into wisdom. You used to walk into every room with an arrogance and a pride, but somewhere along the way, that got you in trouble. And somehow, by the grace of God, it's been spun into humility, and it's saved your marriage, it saved your relationship with your kids. It got repurposed. The wounds are still there, but it got repurposed. And every single one of us in this room, you have the promise in Christ that you come to him, you will hear Jesus say, and Peter, and Jared. It's the first day of a new creation when you bring your wounds and your pain, and your hurts, and your broken dreams to the foot of the empty tomb. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for new creation. I just wonder if there's somebody within the sound of my voice today, you need to hear Jesus say over you and Peter. There's somebody, maybe you came to church today, you didn't even want to come, but this past week, these past few months, you're so desperate for a inbreaking of grace and mercy in your life. You're like, I'll try it. I'll do anything. I'm desperate for God to show up in a relationship, my finances. And today, you just need to stand in the presence of resurrected King Jesus, the tender shepherd, and hear him say over you and Peter. Is that anybody within the sound of my voice? You just raise your hand and say, I just need to hear that today. I just need to hear Jesus say my name. I just need to hear the grace of God wash over me. I just need to know what feels like the end is not the ending. It's a new beginning in Christ. And I don't know what it looks like, and I don't know how, and I don't know when, and I don't know where, but I'm praying. A restored me is better than a perfect me, because I lost perfection. And Peter, and Jared, and Marcelo, and Justin, God, all throughout this room, would you speak a word of tenderness and kindness over my brothers and sisters? And it's in Jesus' name that I pray, and all of God's children said, amen. Grace and peace. Let's sing together.
clothes I wear, I bought on my own. Thank Him for His truth this morning. Scarlet sins had a crimson cost. You nailed my debt to that old rugged cross. An empty slate at the empty grave. Thank God that stone was rolled away. And Lord, I confess that I've been the prodigal, made for your house, but walk my own roads. Then Jesus came and tore down my prison walls, and death came to life when He called me by name. Scarlet sins had a crimson cross. You nailed my debt to that old rugged cross. You empty slate at the empty grave. Thank God that stone was rolled. Scarlet sins had a crimson cross. You nailed my debt to that old rugged cross. An empty slate at the empty grave. Thank God that stone was rolled away. It was rolled away with you and me in mind. I see bright crimson robes draped over the ashes, a wide open tomb where there should be a casket. And children are singing and dancing and laughing. The Father is welcoming. This is our homecoming. Roses in bloom, they pushed up from the embers. Rivers of tears flow from good times remembered. Families are singing and dancing and laughing. The Father is welcoming. This is our, listen. Heaven joins in with the glorious sound. Great cloud of witnesses all gather round. 'Cause the ones that were lost are finally found. The Father is welcoming. This is our homecoming. Scarlet sins had a crimson cross. You nailed my debt to that old rugged cross. An empty slate at the empty grave. Thank God that stone was rolled. Scarlet sins had a crimson cross. You nailed my debt. Oh yes, you did. An empty slate at the empty grave. Thank God that stone was rolled away. It was rolled away. Yes, it was. The Father is welcoming. This is our homecoming. Yes, it is. No matter where you are, this is it.
I love it. That's good. Hey, one of the best places you can find restoration here is on Tuesday nights. Celebrate Recovery, Tuesday nights at 6:30. Come. You're more than welcome to be a part of that. You're going to find a great group of loving people who are going to welcome you home. It's going to be a great homecoming for you. And then next week is Father's Day. And here's what I want to say. I know all the moms, like one of your best things for Mother's Day is to get your whole family to church. Men, I'm going to challenge you. I need you to take ownership next week. You wake your families up. You get them here. We have a car show. There's gonna be 20 muscle cars, old classic cars. If you have a car, you can go to the hub. We wanna show off your car too. But I tell you what, we have a great week planned for you next week on Father's Day. But go be the church where you work, live, and play, and we'll see you next week.